Good afternoon. Now, you've got plenty of space. If you like to spread out, that's fine. If you want to come a bit closer, there are chairs here as well. Okay, so my name is Ben Knight. I work at Cambridge University Press. Before I hand over to Cynthia, who's going to talk about her project, I just wanted to put a bit of context around the project. Teachers naturally reflect on their teaching, thinking about what works and what doesn't work. Why would they spend time taking that reflection to a deeper level to create a mini research project instead of just thinking and talking about it? Well, we've looked at research around the world and experience around the world, and these teacher research projects have a big impact on the teacher's own professional development, and they also have a great use to the institution itself, because the institution gets research and insight which is tailored to its own context. And for this reason, we have tried to support teacher research projects around the world. For a number of years now, we've supported 5 teacher research projects each year. And what we do is we provide financial support and expert advice from professionals such as Simon Borg, leading academics in this field. And we invite applications from teachers around the world through our website, and we choose 5 of the most promising projects each year and support them in this way. And then from those 5 projects, we choose 1 project to give a presentation at IATEFL, such as Cynthia this year. Now for the current year, we're choosing 5 projects on a theme of blended learning, and that'll be to support throughout the year and to choose one of those 5 projects to present at next year's IATEFL, and we sponsor the speaker for next year's IATEFL. Now we have actually finished and chosen all those 5 projects, but for IATEFL we have created 1 extra space for an additional research project. And if you are interested in getting Cambridge support for your own teacher research project, you can go to the website, cambridge.org/TRP, that's Teacher Research Project, and you can fill in the application, and if yours is the most promising, we will add you to the list of projects. I've also left or given to you a sheet about other research projects that we're doing at Cambridge University Press, and which you can have an opportunity to participate in. So please have a look at that, and if you're interested in any of those, have any questions, contact me using the email address there. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Cynthia, who's going to talk about the research project that she undertook in Malaysia. I just wanted to say, as proof of the benefit of teacher research, Cynthia has now been promoted from teaching to supervising English language programs at primary level in her region of Malaysia. So there's evidence that it helps your career progression. Let me pass over to Cynthia.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Ben, for introducing me. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Cambridge University Press for the support and for this amazing opportunity. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you my story, the things that I did with my students in the classroom in this program, as well as the things that we learned throughout the process. And so I'll start with sharing with you some background information about my school. Gudon National Primary School is the school where I teach. It is in the Kota Kinabalu district, Kota Kinabalu City is the capital city of Sabah in Malaysia. We currently have 500 students and 35 teachers. And for this program, I had chosen 31 students in my year 6 class. They are 11 to 12 years old, and they come from middle to low income families, and their level is upper elementary. Primary school achievement test, or better known among Malaysian teachers and students by its acronym in Malay, UPSR, is a compulsory national test which all Malaysian students would have to sit for by the end of their 6th year of primary schooling. And English is one of the compulsory subjects. So according to my students, section C, which is the writing part, is the most challenging section in the English paper. So the maximum score for this section is 15, but in the practice test that we did in the class, most of my students were only able to get around 2 to 3 marks. So this is an example of section C. So in the paper, there are 3 or 4 more boxes just like this, pictures with some words underneath to guide students to write a short story of about 100 to 150 words. And this is the marking scheme for section C. As you can see, there are 4 bands, and excellent, credit, achievement, low achievement. So based on my students' scores in the practice test that we did, most of my students were in the low achievement level. Despite the low scores in the practice test for section C, I believe that my students had so much potential to be good writers. I think the greatest obstacle in them seeing progress in their writing is their own lack of interest in writing itself. A lot of my students lack the confidence. They believe that writing is something that is very difficult, and they don't think that they'll be able to do it well. And so I don't want my students to associate writing activities so much, associate it so much with examinations and tests. So the purpose of this project is to explore ways of making writing a more positive experience for my students. And I aimed at doing that by experimenting with technology, because I noticed that my students love technology, particularly their smartphones. They spend a lot of time with their smartphones. And so I wanted to utilize this interest to make writing more engaging, more personal, and more meaningful for my students. So I started teaching in Gudong in January last year. And prior to that, I had taught in a smaller school, which is located about 500 kilometers away from the capital of Sabah. It's in quite a rural area. It's in a small village by the sea. And I taught year 6 classes too. And what I noticed about the students in my former school is that even though the pressures and the demands of examinations were there, but they went through it with minimal or no stress at all. I think it's probably the influence of the location. They lived by the sea, so they had a lot of opportunities to escape from the pressures of studying an examination. They went swimming in the sea, fishing, roaming around the village. My students in Gudong, on the other hand, they are a little bit different. They live in a suburban area, and they rarely go out of the house after school. Safety is a big concern. And so what do they do for fun? They play with the smartphone all the time. And so, yeah. One day when I was looking at my students, I remember thinking to myself, I think what my students needed was they needed the sea. I need to bring them to the sea. I mean, there is no sea in Gudong, unfortunately, and I could bring them to a trip for a trip to the sea, but it's going to cost a lot of money. The school doesn't have a lot of money, so I thought if I couldn't bring my students to the sea, perhaps I could bring the sea to them through their smartphones. So this is what this project is all about. It is about bringing the joy and enjoyment of learning through the things that my students love. So while preparing for the project, I did some reading on reluctant writers. Studies have shown that students who are reluctant writers, they tend to avoid the task because they refuse to deal with mistakes. They don't like making mistakes. But instead of working on getting themselves better, they avoid the task altogether. And also, studies have shown that this reluctance to write may be influenced by the students' past failures in tests and examination, which has resulted in the lack of self-confidence. And so I don't want this to continue. I want my students to see writing as something that is more positive rather than associating with examinations and tests. So I did some reading on using stories. If you notice, section C that I showed to you just now, it is actually focusing on testing my students' skills in story writing. And so, yeah, and a lot has been written about how stories can create a happy and enjoyable learning environment for children. And stories are great tools for introducing, practicing, and improving language skills. And a lot has also been written about how using technology in the teaching of writing can develop confidence among children, and social media such as WhatsApp and blog that I use in this project, they are actually perfect platforms for students to receive and get feedback on their writing. And if utilized properly, I think this can help students to see writing as something that is interactive, meaningful, and fun. And recent studies have shown that technologies can encourage greater collaboration and participation among students, as well as enhance their creativity and self-expression. So this is my plan for the project. I divided the project into 3 stages. In stage 1, I did some classroom activities where I introduced the students to the idea of a story prompt. Now, what is a story prompt? A story prompt is a stimulus. It can be in the form of an image, a video clip, or a sound clip that the students use to stir their imagination and help them to be more creative in writing a story. I'm going to show you an example of a story prompt in a moment. So in stage 2, I got my students to engage themselves collaboratively to create their own story prompts in small groups. And then in stage 3, the students created and shared their stories through these 2 platforms, WhatsApp group and KidBlog. So the data for this project was gathered through a pre-test conducted at the beginning of the project, as well as a post-test at the end, as well as the students' written reflections throughout the project. So I'll show you some sample activities for each stage. Now let's look at stage 1. Okay, this image here is an example of a story prompt. I used this image to conduct an activity in the class called the mental picture dictation. This was inspired by an activity in the book Images by Jamie Caddy. So this is how I did it. Without showing the picture, I described the picture to my students. I told them that this picture, I have a picture here, and it was taken at the zoo. There was a little boy sitting on the chair waiting for his photograph to be taken by a photographer. I didn't say that it was a panda, and the photographer was from China, and he was too short. He had to stand on the chair in order to reach the camera, which was on a tripod. So I described it to them, and then I asked them to visualize the image in their heads. And then after that, I got them to sit in small groups and then write a short paragraph about the picture without seeing the picture. And after they were done with the writing, representatives from each group would share what they had written, and then they would receive feedback from their peers. And then at the end of the lesson, I revealed the picture, and then, yeah, ta-da, it's a panda. And yeah, my students had a blast out of it, so they loved it. So the purpose of this activity was to train my students to use their imaginations to be more creative in their writing. Okay, so this is a sample activity that I did in stage 2. This is a mini project that my students did. I asked them to go around the school and capture images around the school, any image with their smartphones, any image that they think is interesting and that can tell a story. And so I gave them a few minutes to do that, And then after they returned to the classroom, I asked them to sit in their groups and then share the pictures that they had taken with their smartphones with the group members, and then picked just one image that they think was the most interesting that could tell a story. So this image here was taken by one of the groups. So this is how we did it in the class. I asked the groups to write a caption for the image that they had taken, that they had picked. So probably just 1 or 2 lines, or maybe a short paragraph. And then they would read out what they had written to the class, and then ask their friends to guess what that picture was, and without revealing the picture. So this is the picture, and then this is what the group had written as the caption for the picture. I'm going to give you a few moments to read it. So, what do you think? None of the students in the class can guess correctly what the picture was, and actually I was blown away by the students' creativity. That's the name of the writers, Devika, Fatin, and Nadira. And the purpose of this activity was to give my students the opportunity to experience writing as something meaningful and purposeful. And also, I wanted my students to know that writing is something that they can do to impress an audience. They can impress their friends, they can impress their teacher. And this group had certainly succeeded in doing that. They managed to impress their friends and as well as their teacher through this. So in the third stage, I created a WhatsApp group for the students. It is called the Story Makers. This is a platform for the students to share story prompts and stories with one another. They can upload images, video clips or sound clips, and then write stories about that, and then receive feedback from their peers. And it can also be used as a collaborative writing platform. Someone can upload an image, and then collaboratively the students can write a story about that. And we did this activity outside the class when the students were at home. This is the second platform that I had set up for my students. This is a class blog. So I used the Kid Blog platform because it is children-friendly, very easy to use, and it's very safe. The students do not have to have an email in order to log in. I just need to set it up, and I'll be given a code. So I'll share the code with my students, and the students will be able to log in using that code. So it's safe, secure. Only the members of the class blog can see the content. And yeah, so they use it the same way as they use the WhatsApp group. They share stories, receive and give feedback, things like that. So yeah, findings and discussions. So I'll be sharing with you my students' changed attitudes towards writing after this project, throughout this project, and also the scores that my students got in the pre-test and post-test. And I will also be sharing with you a comparison between a practice test that we did at the beginning of the year and the actual UPSR result. Okay, so I gathered the data for this by asking my students to write reflections. This question here, how do you feel about writing, was asked at the beginning of the project before I conducted any of the intervention activities. And to guide my students to write their reflections, I provided the reflection sheet with the question written on it in English with the Malay translation. So I gave my students the choice to either respond in English or Malay. And then I read through my students' responses, and I tried to find answers that I can categorize into the same category. And so this chart here shows that for the question, how do you feel about writing, difficult appear 39% of the time. The answer, don't like writing, 26%, and related to exam 19%. Okay, this one, I asked this question while the project was going on, right after the students did the mini project where they took the pictures around the school. And how do you feel about today's writing activity? 43% of my students associated it with positive feelings, enjoy, funny, creative. And then 33% describe what they learn about story writing through the activity. For example, one of my students wrote that today I learned that in order for a story to be interesting, it must have an element of surprise. That's one example. And then 14% describe why they like or dislike a particular story. And this question I asked them at the end of the project to get the students' overall impression of the project, what they thought about it. And 32% associated it with positive experience, awesome, happy, and etc. 32% describe the story writing process in their reflection. For instance, one of my students wrote that she learned how to write a story by first brainstorming ideas, selecting the characters, thinking about the plot, the climax, what feelings and emotions she wanted to put in. And so that's an example. And also 23% of my students wrote in their reflection that section C to them is no longer hard. It's something that they can do. All right, so this is my students' average scores in the pre-test and post-test. So these pre-test and post-test are only for section C. It is not for the whole English paper, for section C only. And so in the pre-test, the average score was 2.9 out of the full mark 15. So in September, when we did the post-test, right before the UPSR, the actual UPSR, the average score had jumped to 6.65 out of the full mark 15. So there was an improvement there. And all the 31 students involved in this project improved in their section C. Okay, so in this table here, January test refers to the practice test that we did at the beginning of the year. And so this test is for the whole English paper, which includes all the components, grammar, spelling, punctuation, comprehension, as well as section C, the writing part. And so in January, and so the UPSR result is the actual UPSR result. So you can see there that there's an improvement, but however, the breakdown for the components in the exams were not released by the Malaysian Examination Board, so I can't compare section C only. So I can't claim that the improvement in the UPSR result is solely based on the students' improvement in section C, but it's encouraging nevertheless. Right. So now my students had become more confident and they enjoyed the writing task. If I may, I would like to share some small success that we had achieved last year. My students participated in the national level competition. When I advertised about the competition to my students, I thought that only 2 or 3 students would be interested to join. But to my surprise, more than half of the class joined. And so the school got a computer for the largest number of entry. And, but that was not the biggest success. The biggest success was 3 of my students won the top spots, 1st place, 2nd place, and 4th place. So it just confirmed my belief that my students had so much potential to be good writers. They're just not interested in it at the beginning. And so, yeah, the use of stories motivated them to write and to be creative. Our recent project is to compile all my students' short stories into a book which we hope to publish this year. And technology, digital prompts, and online platforms that we use in this project supported the development of students' writing. And I think what I learned, I think the most valuable thing that I learned through this project is that I think the most effective teaching and learning can happen when the students' engagement is at its optimum level. I can bring in all the latest pedagogical strategies or the most sophisticated tools, but if I fail to recognize what engages my students and I don't know how to utilize it to help my students learn, I think I'm going nowhere, we are going nowhere. I think the most precious moment in this project was when my students told me that I had succeeded in making them learn what they need to learn by making them believe that they really want to learn it. I think that sums it all up. And yeah, so if I were to bring this further, I would like to explore more ways on how technology can help my students to be better writers. I would like to experiment with more platforms, more apps, more softwares, more devices. And yeah, I think that's all that I have to share. And if you'd like to ask me any question, feel free to do so. Alternatively, you can also email me and I'll be happy to get back to you. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening.